Chronic fatigue syndrome, at its core, is dysfunction of the mitochondria. Every single one of the biochemical processes that occurs throughout your body is dependent on the mitochondria and its production of something called ATP. ATP at the cellular level is our body's energy source. When someone can't make energy, it will be impossible for that person to recover, impossible for that person to heal, or just for that person to be overall healthy. At the end of the day, chronic fatigue syndrome comes down to figuring out all the things that disrupt the mitochondria and all the things that activate it. And in reality, both may be involved. Managing someone with a fatigue syndrome comes down to understanding all of the factors that are capable of disrupting the mitochondria, as well as the ones that promote growth of the mitochondria. You may be exposed to or partake in a host of things that disrupt the mitochondria and its production of ATP, or maybe you just don't participate in enough activities that promote growth and development of the mitochondria. Figuring out how to unravel this web is what makes managing this condition so difficult. Sometimes there are true medical conditions at play, and sometimes there are just physiological mechanisms that become a little altered. For example, someone may have anemia or hypothyroidism or an autoimmune disease, or it could just be related to inflammation or a sedentary lifestyle or a food sensitivity, or maybe a combination of all of them. The list is endless. And honestly, when it comes to most chronic illness patients, at least the ones that I see, there's often a combination of many of these factors that we have to try and unravel in order to get this person heading down the road to recovery. We live in this really hustle and bustle world. We don't have time to wait around. Everything needs to be done as quick as possible. And with that being said, managing one's diet is often a very critical part of this puzzle because so many of us are just bouncing around from one fast food joint to the next, eating very inflammatory foods, engaging in very little physical activity, never getting a good night's rest, and on and on. I want you to think about this. When the mitochondria produces ATP, it also makes something called a superoxide radical. Similar to how whenever you eat something, your body will break it down, take whatever nutrients it needs out of that food, and excrete the rest as waste. The mitochondria does the same thing. It takes in a bunch of precursors in order to do its job of making ATP and then excretes the waste. They just have a fancy name for their waste, superoxide radical. What's really neat about this, but can also be very debilitating, is when this superoxide radical is produced, it needs to bind to something. And if that something is the mitochondria, it will actually destroy the mitochondria. So, what needs to happen, and what actually does happen in normal healthy individuals, is the mitochondria produces ATP while also releasing a superoxide radical. And if our antioxidant stores are high enough, the superoxide radical will bind to an antioxidant like glutathione, quenching that superoxide radical. But if you have some sort of inflammatory condition and you deplete your body of antioxidants, when your mitochondria actually make energy and you don't have the reserve of antioxidants to meet the demand of the superoxide radical and ultimately protect the mitochondria end up dying and you end up driving yourself right into a fatigue syndrome. Because obviously, the more mitochondria that you lose, the less ATP you can produce. When this superoxide radical is produced, it really shouldn't be that big of a deal because your antioxidant reserves should be high enough to quench that inflammatory response. When that free radical binds to antioxidants like glutathione, it actually protects the mitochondria. But once you have more superoxide radicals than antioxidants, that's when things go wrong and disease occurs. And I'm not just talking about chronic fatigue syndrome. This can lead to a whole host of different illnesses, but we'll just talk about chronic fatigue syndrome in this video. Over time, as we age, there will be damage to every mitochondria because as it makes ATP, it also makes superoxide radicals. And even if you have healthy levels of glutathione, it isn't a perfect system. Eventually, it will break down, just like how your iPhone doesn't last forever. But lucky for you, the great creator of the universe thought about this and built in a way for us to manage this situation. We have a process called fission. Fission is where a damaged part of a mitochondria will actually be broken off and destroyed and excreted as waste. Think about it like taking off the weakest link of a chain. We also have another process called fusion. Fusion is when you're in situations when you get into a higher state of energy demands, your mitochondria can actually fuse together and basically become one mega mitochondria, which ultimately makes it operate a little bit more efficiently. This is just one of the possibilities that could lead to a fatigue syndrome. And if you'd like to learn all about chronic fatigue syndrome and how I work through managing these patients, check out our website at the link below. I've created a free PDF guide that you can download that'll walk you through exactly how I think about managing these cases.